Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and exciting news and leaks that we got for Monster Hunter Rise on the Nintendo Switch. If you've been keeping your ears on the ground, you know that a massive Capcom leak happened just a few weeks ago, where just about every single one of their major releases for the next few years got out. Alongside all of that data, some Monster Hunter Rise data was also been surfacing, not just for the fans of the series, but those who are also looking forward to this brand new entry, namely a brand new set of monsters being revealed and the returning ones as well. First off, I want to give a huge shout out to *1 on Twitter for working on the translation to get this information out for the people. Essentially, because all of this data is in Japanese, it's taking people who first want to do the work but also have the passion to translate it to get it done. And he's been on top of it, so translating the leak, but not this Monster Hunter Rise data as well. So without him, none of this would be possible, and I can't stress this enough. So be sure to give his account a follow if you can. I highly recommend it. Alright, now on to the actual leaks, and there's about 15 monsters or so that are being named in this leak so far. But there's about 3 other monsters that I'll be adding to it as well that have already basically been confirmed. The first monster that appears in the list is Lagambi, which is essentially a starter monster and a fan favorite. This is an easy monster to start playing the game with and one that you can build up an armor set with and get people started right out of the gate. It's also worth noting that this is a nice monster and you're going to start to see a theme going pretty much right away. The next monster is Kezu, a massive fan favorite, and I'm so excited to see him come back. Essentially, a lot of people have been asking to see Kezu back because we haven't seen him since Monster Hunter Generations, or maybe Generations Ultimate. So it's been quite a while since we haven't seen this monster. Now, because this is in a brand new engine to begin with, he's gonna have a brand new model to the game, and I'm so excited to see how disgusting they could actually make him look. This is actually some really cool news that I'm personally so excited to see. Moving on to the third returning monster would be Barrath. Now this is the third ice monster and you're starting to notice a pattern, and there's a reason for that and I'll be talking about it in a little bit. But essentially Barrath, the last we saw him was just right now in Iceborne, where he was reintroduced, and he's a big fan favorite. A lot of people like him, and he's one of those really agile monsters to begin with. It makes a lot of sense to see him come back in a handheld experience because it just keeps people moving all the time. Another massive fan favorite returning is Tigrex. Now Tigrex, again, another Iceborne monster being introduced. I'm pretty sure he was an Iceborne, not in the original Monster Hunter world. Another one of those monsters that just keeps people moving, hectic battles. It's kind of like a skill check in a way, kind of like Karen was in the original Monster Hunter world, where like if you're not ready to fight Tigrex, he'll let you know. It's one of those like high damage fights. You can't just waste time and just try to, turtle him. It's a quick fight online, and a lot of people are definitely going to be excited to see him making a comeback. Now the only real disappointment one here to me is Barrath, only because we just kind of had him in Monster Hunter World, and he's another one of those starter monsters that just kind of like lets people get started and learning how to play the game. There are several starter type monsters in this list already. Barrath is not a really exciting one to me personally, but that whole mud mechanic is an interesting one and a unique one for sure, that I'm kind of interested to see if they're going to take the Monster Hunter World approach again, or if they're going to go back to the old Generations type one. Only time will tell. Rajang is another fan favorite one returning. This is pretty much everybody's favorite Goku in Monster Hunter. It's a gimme that he should come back. I believe he was just introduced again in Iceborne, so yeah. It makes so much sense to see him come back. A lot of this list does feel like the returning monster ones specifically are like fan favorite ones that they know people want to see again, and they especially want to be able to get them to play on a handheld experience, because again, this is probably going to be a lot of people's first Monster Hunter handheld experience to begin with. A lot of people jumped into World for the first time, but that's a console experience. The handheld one was a little bit daunting back on the 3DS, and now with the Switch, it kind of fulfills both roles. It's going to be really interesting to see if they decide to just kind of focus on more, again, moving type monsters that are more acute or more tailored for a handheld experience, where the console version felt like they were more structured and set pieces. Now the least surprising one to me in this list is Rathalos. Now Rathalos has basically been in every single Monster Hunter game since basically the first one. Rathalos, we kind of already knew this monster was going to be in the game already, and I'll talk about that in a little bit with another monster. If you've been following my videos to begin with, you've already seen that there's Rathalos armor in the game, not just for your hunter, but also the Palamute and the Palico. So essentially, Monster Hunter without Rathalos would not be Monster Hunter. And it makes the most amount of sense to basically have this monster here. He's kind of like a flagship monster. He's always been around. The series kind of has been known for Rathalos, so yeah, it just makes the most amount of sense. It doesn't seem like a surprising pick. You know, it just wouldn't be. Now, this is where things start to get really interesting because Kulu Yaku is coming into Monster Hunter Rise. Now, this is a Monster Hunter World specific monster. That's the first time that it was introduced. It's only appeared in that game and Iceborne, obviously. So to see this monster appearing in this game is going to be interesting because this is a brand new engine with a brand new set of models, essentially. So we're going to see how they're going to rework that monster. Now, this is another one of those starter ones that I talked about where it's like a little bit disappointing because there's like Barrath already there and Lagambi and stuff like that. So another starter monster, but it's just interesting to see that there's a world-specific one there. I'll talk about another one later on, but you know, this is a theme if you're starting to pick up on it. Anjanath is another Monster Hunter World specific monster that is going to be coming to Rise, and it's just kind of like that second flagship monster that it basically was for World. I do wonder if the such species are going to be making a return, because if they do, Anjanath is going to be great to see. Essentially, this was the first monster that a lot of people got to see in World because of the demo and the trailers Capcom was putting out a lot. So we're going to definitely see how this game runs in comparison to World, at least the starter PlayStation 4 version. I'm hoping that the frame rates are stable on Switch, but essentially, because a lot of these monsters are in World already, we're just going to be able to see how well they move and how they're animated. Definitely in a different engine, but essentially just about locked 30 frames per second, hopefully. Now, the next one is extremely exciting because we've already seen this monster already, and that's the spider one called Yorogumo. Now, apparently that's the English name that it's going to have, but in Japanese, we already know that its name is Yasukadaki, because about 2 months ago, that name was either leaked in some sort of magazine or a printout or something, where like they basically got hold of the Japanese name, or it was in one of the trailers or something like that. But essentially, Yorogumo will be the Western name if the translation and the leak is accurate, of course. We're hoping that it is, where this spider monster that a lot of people thought was a returning one from a previous game, that's not the case. This is the brand new spider monster. We've seen it, but we just haven't actually seen it in action or with an actual name attached to it. Now, another returning monster that's extremely exciting to me is Valstrax. Essentially, we haven't seen this one since Generations, and probably has something to do with the game's mechanics, where obviously he flies up to the sky, he dive bombs into the entire area and kind of blows everything up. They probably didn't want to do that in World because it was just a lot of rendering work, whereas this game, it kind of feels like it's just another step, another iteration to the handheld experience. So basically, they feel very comfortable to be able to bring that monster back, where he was just kind of like a handheld experience and a showpiece monster for sure. So really interesting to see Valstrax making a comeback. Another interesting one, but kind of a no-brainer surprise, is Mitsuzane. Basically, this one was rumored to begin with because of the Japanese theme, like to just about every single aspect of Monster Hunter Rise. So Mitsuzane coming back and basically appearing in this game, it isn't a surprise to me. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's kind of like Rathalos and Rathian. To me, like it makes the most amount of sense. But yeah, Mitsuzane coming back, sure, why not? Another interesting coming back monster is Camellios. Now, Camellios is another Elder Dragon. I'm not necessarily sure if it connects to the Japanese theme in any kind, but the whole, stealth poison thing is an interesting one for sure. And if they're going to try to do some different things and different themes to this game for sure, Camellios makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. We haven't seen him a lot in a lot of games, so it's just interesting to see him come back. The last two monsters that we're going to talk about that are part of this leak are brand new monsters. Now, the interesting thing is that we have no names, and we just have kind of like what they represent. So one of them is basically considered a weasel type new monster. That's it. There's no like code name. We don't have any moves. We don't have a picture. We don't have anything. It's just basically themed off a weasel. So take that with whatever it's going to be. I'm not necessarily sure what to take until we actually get to see it. The other one is actually a Namahage bear type monster. Now, I had to look this up because essentially Namahage is not a popular word that a lot of people will be used to hearing, but essentially refers to Japanese mythology. Now, Magnamalos, if you've actually seen the trailers, Magnamalos has to do a lot with Japanese mythology. Namahage type bear monster might have something to do with Magnamalos, essentially probably being another elder type monster, maybe an elder type bear, who knows. But it'll be definitely interesting to see. Now, the three monsters that I wanted to bring up specifically for me is Rathian, which I already mentioned before. We know Rathian is going to be in the game because the Rathian armor is already in the game. We've shown it in videos already, so that isn't much of a surprise. Rathian, just like Rathalos, has already been in just about every single Monster Hunter game to begin with. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Rathian is coming back. Palamute and Palico armor, there's a human armor set already in the game for him, so it shouldn't surprise to anyone. Rathian is just pretty much guaranteed. The second of the three is Toby Kadachi. Now, we know Toby Kadachi is in the game because he's been shown in the trailer where Magnamalos takes him over, or like he makes him do his bidding, or whatever the situation is, which is something that we'll talk about in a little bit. So essentially, Toby Kadachi is going to be in the game, but for some reason it's not part of this leak, which is fascinating to me. Kind of like Rathian. It's just like, yeah, they're going to be in there, but they're not willing to talk about it. And the last one that we know is going to be in the game is the Great Jagras, because we've already seen Jagras in the game, in the one area that we've seen already. Jagras is walking about, so the Great Jagras coming back shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. That armor is going to be in the game. It's another one of those starter type monsters that just kind of gets people going. It's just going to make the most amount of sense to have them in there. Now, new monsters aren't the only thing that are part of this leak. There's also mentions of Thundra Archipelago and the Molten Cave as brand new areas. Now, remember earlier when I talked about Lagambi, Kezu, and Barrath as being snow monsters, and that's because essentially they're going to make a Tundra Archipelago, aka an ice area, where you're going to be able to explore and all the ice monsters are going to be there. That's just great. Essentially coming off of Iceborne, where they could just make another ice area for those people who really like that mechanic, and then just make them happy, and then just section them off into their own specific ice area. Very exciting to see that. Now, the other one, the Molten Cave, is interesting because we haven't seen a fire-specific themed area in a while. I don't remember one maybe since Generations, but it was certainly opened the gates for monsters like Gravelas and even Agnactor, which is a monster that we probably haven't seen a lot. It's not necessarily a fan favorite, I don't think, but it would be an interesting one to see come back because, again, it's just one of those handheld type monsters that they just didn't get a lot of play. So if they do bring a Molten Cave zone to the game, that'd definitely be exciting because fire-specific areas are definitely cool. The last quick little bit that we got is that there's two basic mechanics, Rampage and Frenzy. Now, that doesn't specifically have anything else attached to it. So I assume that Frenzy talks about kind of like Monster Hunter World with the virus, where they just kind of like get more powerful and they have maybe a different version of that monster. But the Rampage specifically to me signals what Magnamalos does with its powers. So if the Rampage is what Magnamalos does, where throwing that purple orb or that purple haze to the monsters, and they're essentially being like enraged or more powerful, or they have different abilities or whatever it might be, that makes a lot of sense. Frenzy seems to be a lot more like the virus, so only time will tell how these mechanics are going to sort out. I'm sure they're going to talk about them sooner rather than later, because remember, the game comes out in about 4 months, so all this information is about to, if it's about to come out, they definitely should start getting on the ball, because if the information is leaking already, they probably want to start getting ahead of it and talking about it. So that's all the information I'll be covering today. Once again, a huge shout out to *1 on Twitter for the translations. Give him a follow if you want to keep up to date with all the upcoming leaks. And be sure to give my channel a follow, since I'll be covering all the information as it trickles out. I'm very much looking forward to this game, so I'm very excited to get all the information that we have so far. So with all that said, if you're new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.